Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are taking a look at the Franchi SPAS-12. Now, I did do a video on this about 10 years ago, and today's video is going to be so much more improved over that one. We're going to take this apart, and we're going to talk about its development and where it came from. A lot of really good new information that wasn't in my previous video. So first off, of course, the SPAS-12 is a gun that you have absolutely seen in movies, in video games, and probably elsewhere in pop culture. It's very popular with entertainment media because it's a very distinctive looking gun. It's got metal heat shieldy bits, it's got a big gold front sight out there, it's got this strange hook on it, lots of things that make it stand out, and it's become a stalwart in all sorts of combat video games and movies like Terminator, Jurassic Park, and so many more. Now, this is one of those instances where the gun's actually really quite good, in addition to being visually distinctive and very popular in entertainment. It's a heavy gun, and it's a fairly long, physically large gun, but it is a very durable, very reliable gun, and it's one that has seen quite a lot of law enforcement and military use, especially with special operations organizations, SWAT teams and military special operations alike. So its development began in the 1970s, mid-70s, with the Franchi 500. This was a gas-operated sporting shotgun, and Franchi wanted to develop something more for the law enforcement and military market. So they took the Franchi 500, they beefed it up a bit, and they gave it a backup pump action system. So there are a bunch of different shotgun operating systems. Gas-operated guns are good, but you're always going to have some issues with the amount of gas that comes out of the shells, and law enforcement are going to need to fire a very wide range of pressured ammunition. Everything from full power buckshot and slugs to relatively low power, less lethal rounds like rubber balls or beanbags, that sort of thing. And so the idea of the pump action backup here is that you have an option for those light loads that aren't going to reliably cycle the automatic action. This was never intended to be like a pump action shotgun or semi-auto shotgun, whichever you happen to prefer. This is a semi-auto shotgun that has a backup pump mechanism to it. Because really, you don't really want to be operating this as a pump. We'll talk about that in a minute. At any rate, Franchi's original iteration of this, and by the late 1970s, is the SPAS-11. The biggest functional difference is that the SPAS-11, like the Franchi 500, has a recoil spring that's located in the buttstock, which means there was no way to have a folding or collapsing buttstock. That was a feature that law enforcement and military agencies really wanted to make the guns compact, to be able to store them in vehicles more easily. And so Franchi redesigns the gun a bit, and they move the recoil spring from back here to around the magazine tube. Now that would have a follow-on effect of requiring a buffer inside the receiver, which you'll see in a minute when we take this apart. With that modification done, essentially we now have the SPAS-12. It goes into production in Italy in 1979, and it becomes a pretty successful gun, a pretty popular gun with law enforcement and military units. It's, like I said, it's durable, it's reliable, it looks cool, and especially in the pre-internet era, SWAT teams and special operations teams are not immune to the pull of something that looks really cool. In late '82, Fiocchi arranges an importation deal to distribute the guns in the United States. They're a company called FIE, and they're introduced in late '82 or early '83. Here you see a wave of media talking about them in 1983, reviews in gun magazines and that sort of thing. And for about 6-7 years, things go great. It's the really cool guy shotgun. But that all kind of comes to an end in 1989 when George Bush Sr. signs an assault weapons importation ban that prevents the SPAS-12 from being imported because it's too scary. So FIE, of course, has major financial problems as a result, and ultimately what happens is the SPAS-12 is passed off to a new importer, AAI, American Armaments Incorporated. They devise a slightly different version of the gun to allow it to pass the import ban. Franchi, at that point, actually changes the name of the gun. It's still the SPAS-12, but it goes from being the special purpose automatic shotgun to being the sporting purpose automatic shotgun, because it's now definitely a sporting gun, because only sporting guns can be imported, don't you know? And along with it, it's now only offered with a fixed stock, because the folding stock was a check mark against it on the import ban checklist, essentially. And the magazine capacity is restricted down to, I believe, 6 rounds, or 5+1, down from an 8-round magazine tube. That allows the gun to be imported until 1994, when the US assault weapons ban legislation, as opposed to just executive order banning import, when the assault weapons ban goes into effect, that kills the SPAS-12. So we'll talk about what Franchi did after 94 in a minute, but first let's dive in. Let me show you how this works, and let's take it apart. The SPAS, of course, looks super cool. It is a fairly bulky, large gun, though. Weighs in at about 10 pounds unloaded. It has a 21.5-inch barrel. There is a much scarcer 18.5-inch barreled version. It's distinctive because, of course, the magazine tube that comes out here is a lot shorter on that. But the vast majority of these that came into the US have the full-length barrel like this. This gives it an 8-round capacity, plus 1 in the chamber if you want. At the front end, and I'll just take this off right now, we have a thread protector. This will use Franchi Variomax chokes if you want. It comes with a cylinder bore barrel, so it is safe to use with slugs, but you can replace that with thread-on chokes of your preference. We have a pretty tall front blade sight, because the rear sight has to be mounted up on this heat shield shroud deal. So we'll look at that in a moment, but that's why the front sight is so tall. Moving back a bit, we have the pump handle / handguard. The button here is what allows you to swap it between automatic and manual modes. So there's automatic mode, push that in, slide it back, and it's in manual mode. And what's actually happening when you're doing that is two things. First off, in automatic mode, the handguard is locked in place on this metal framework. And secondly, when you move it back and forth, it is actually rotating the gas system and either opening or closing the gas ports. So we'll take a look at that when we pull it apart as well. Receiver markings, a SPAS-12 Luigi Franchi SPA, that's essentially incorporated out of Brescia, made in Italy. These are all made in Italy, they weren't made in the US. There is a second style of receiver marking where the SPAS-12 is about the same size as the Luigi Franchi, and the L is abbreviated. That is sometimes interpreted as being a SPAS-12-L by Franchi. SPAS-12L is not actually a thing. That L, when you see it, is just an abbreviation for Luigi Franchi, the company name. On the other side, you have the import marks, which are pretty hard to read. There we go. FIE Corporation out of Miami. And then there are a batch of Italian proof marks on the bottom here. The one that is particularly relevant is this one, which is, again, hard to read, but that is the letter, those are the letters AT in a box, and that is a date code indicating that this particular one was manufactured in 1988. The SPAS-12 was made with both a fixed solid stock and a top folding metal strut stock, and there are a couple different versions of this top folding stock. Some, including this one, of course, have this spring-loaded latch assembly that actually locks into the rear sight to hold the stock in the folded position. So to deploy it, you're just going to push back on this, which unlocks it, and then you can lift it up off that rear sight. And then it is locked in position by this spring-loaded detent on the back of the stock. And again, there are a couple different variations. Some of them will actually have sort of a spooned out raised section here so that you can just slide the stock down and it will automatically push this detent in. This one doesn't. You have to manually push the detent in to lock it in place. And if you want to refold the stock, push it in and lift up. Now, this thing is in here for no particularly good reason. This looks like a sling swivel. This is actually a holdover from an earlier version of the design. In, like, at the SPAS-11 stage, there was actually a setup here where you could, there was a control here that you could use to actually completely remove the folding stock if you wanted to. They ended up getting rid of that for reasons that aren't entirely clear, and they filled it in with a polymer piece just so that they didn't have to change the molds on the pistol grip. So you can see it's a separate piece there. It's not a particularly resilient plastic. It's not the same material that they make the rest of the grip out of. And so be careful with this. They are known to deteriorate and sometimes break. I wouldn't use it as a sling swivel. On that same note, there's another piece of that plastic in the front of the grip here, because again, the very first, in fact, in this case, the very first versions of the SPAS-12 that were produced had a grip safety in them. It was just a simple trigger blocking grip safety. There was a plastic element here and a little L-shaped metal bar, and when you pushed the grip safety in, it pivoted that bar out of the way so that you could pull the trigger. That was apparently removed on the specific request of the Italian law enforcement and military customers that Franchi was courting. And again, rather than change the mold for the pistol grip, they just inserted a plastic block basically in the space for the grip safety. Okay, back to the stock for a moment. We have a second element that can fold right here so that the whole stock can be flat for minimum space. And of course, then you have the hook. Now the hook is removable. You can just push it in, and in fact, if we rotate it up to the top position, I can just take it out completely. And then, and by the way, a lot of owners did that because that hook is kind of awkward. Its purpose is to allow you to shoot the gun, to, well, hang that hook off your arm and shoot the gun one-handed while hanging out the window of a car. Again, police. Not a whole lot of people were actually doing that, so a lot of people got rid of the hooks. The hooks are actually kind of hard to find today. They're a desirable item in their own right. Anyway, with the stock completely folded down, it's a little more compact this way. Do note, there is supposed to be a polymer buffer on this cross pin to prevent the stock from wearing under fire when it can move like this. And unfortunately, I don't have that buffer, but I am working on getting one for this gun. I showed you the front sight. Here's the rear sight. It is a gigantic ghost ring aperture for buckshot or birdshot. And then there's a little notch at the bottom. You can see right down in there. You actually use that sort of like pistol sights, line that up with the top of the front blade for shooting slugs. All right, and last but not least, that brings us to controls, which there are a number of. This can be a little bit of an intimidating gun to run until you understand how all the bits work, because it has to have all of the controls for both a semi-auto and a pump action. So first off, we have a crossbolt safety here. Red is fire, not red is not fire. When these were originally actually made, they had a lever safety that would rotate, I believe, 90 degrees. The problem is that lever safety had a flaw built into it, and over time they would fail in such a way that if you engaged the safety, when you disengaged the safety, when you put it into the fire position, it could actually just discharge spontaneously. When you moved the safety lever, that's obviously a really bad thing. There was a recall, but a lot of the guns were never actually taken in. This is pre-internet, and so there are a fair amount of these guns out there with the lever safeties. If you have one with a lever safety, don't rely on it. And I mean, you should always be pointing the gun in a safe direction, but be extra sure that when you're, if you're actually loading ammunition, when you take the gun off of safe, make sure that it is pointed in a safe direction. Anyway, this has the upgraded crossbolt safety, and there is also this second safety called the quick safety. That you can use as the only safety in the gun. And it's got a few automatic, there are times when it will automatically engage. So you're gonna be running this no matter what, whether you're using this crossbolt as well. So right now, I have the gun in manual mode. You can see the handguards lined up with the M for manual line. And if that's forward, the slide is locked in position. If I want to manually open the slide, I can either fire the gun, which unlocks it, or I can push this back, and then I can manually open the gun. Now, it will lock open when it's empty, which it is right now. I also want to point out, because there's a recoil spring located around the magazine tube in here, you are actually fighting the recoil spring when you manually operate the gun. So it's not the world's greatest pump action. Again, that's just supposed to be a backup sort of feature. Once I have this open, I can then go ahead and close it by pushing the button on the left side. That is the slide release. Manually close the action. Now, if I switch this to automatic mode, push the button in the bottom of the stock, slide it forward, lock it into A for automatic mode. Now, when the quick safe is forward, the gun can fire, and I can't open the bolt. If I want to manually cycle it, I push the safety back. That prevents it from firing and allows me to unlock the bolt, and then it automatically re-engages that safety. So disengaged, well, backwards for this case. And when I cycle the bolt, that pops back into position. So again, it can be a little complicated getting the hang of all of these controls. Lastly, we have this button on the right side. This is a magazine cutoff. This allows you to open the bolt without having a round from the magazine pop into the lifter. And the reason you would do this is if you have one type of ammunition in the tube, but you want to fire one round of some other sort of ammo. Typically, that would not be less lethal. Typically, a less lethal shotgun is only loaded with less lethal ammunition. It might be you have buckshot loaded, but you need to use a slug. So use the magazine disconnect so that you can open the chamber, eject around a buckshot, drop in a slug, and fire it for one special purpose. All right, there are a couple different ways you can take the gun apart, different orders you can disassemble stuff. We'll go through the method that's actually detailed in the manual because that's probably the most official one to use. Start with the magazine extension tube and unscrew this. They are often pretty tight. There is a little tiny wire right there that sits against ratchet teeth on the back of the magazine tube. That prevents it from unscrewing in regular use, and it makes that cool clicky noise when you do take it out. We can take this off, then have your magazine spring. That comes out. And the follower. When you put this in, you want this end of the follower presenting, so you put it in that direction. Now we do want to start, sorry I should have mentioned this, with the bolt locked open. Once you pull out the magazine tube, there's actually nothing holding the whole front end of the gun onto the receiver, and so we can actually just slide the barrel and gas assembly. Well, we can slide the barrel and handguard assembly here off, leaving the receiver, the magazine tube, the spring, and the gas piston. Be careful because this is compressed. That's under tension. While we are here, and note that there is an O-ring on the front of the magazine tube, and it needs to be there. This is important. And it has to be in front of the gas piston. So you'll have to pay attention when you put this back on, that the gas piston goes in first, then the O-ring goes on the end of the magazine tube. Now I'm going to hold this to control it, and I'm going to push the slide release button and allow that to extend. That's a big spring, but it's not a super strong spring. In fact, when you're shooting the SPAS-12, this has this really kind of enjoyable, slow kerchunk sort of noise to it. Anyway, all right, the next step is to take the charging handle out. To do that, you're going to pull the action back just slightly so that you can actually slide the bolt back and forth. And there's a little divot right in the top of the bolt. When it's lined up with a lug on the charging handle, right like that. So there's that semicircular protrusion on the top of the charging handle. When it's lined up, you can just pull the handle out. And then you can pull the bolt, the gas piston, the op rod all out of the gun. The magazine spring, or the action spring, sorry, comes off. And we're left with a receiver and magazine tube. All right, we can also then take the pistol grip and folding stock assembly off. There's this big screw sort of lug on the back. This is sized to use a coin to take out. This one I know is already a bit loose, so I'm just going to use a big screwdriver. But in the US, a nickel will fit that nicely. So you got that big plug and a washer, and then stock comes off of the receiver. Next up, and this is well beyond normal takedown, but we can also take out the fire control unit by punching out these two cross pins. These are not captive, and they will go in or out either direction. Once you've got them this loose, you don't actually have to drop them completely out of the receiver. Once they're that loose, you can take out the fire control unit. And the reason we would do that would be to potentially replace the buffer in the back of the receiver. Now, I mentioned this buffer earlier on. That's there because there's no longer a recoil spring coming out the back of the receiver, and they needed something to prevent impact to the back of this aluminum receiver. Those buffers do wear out in time, and when they wear out, they will crumble into nothing, and then you will start slamming the bolt housing, this guy, into the back of the receiver, and you will break your SPAS-12, and you will be very sad. There's a little hole at the back here, and I'm just going to use this Allen wrench to pop out the buffer. There are two different styles of these buffers. This particular one is conical, some of them are flat. The only reliable way to know which your gun needs is to take it apart to this level and look. Happily, Midway USA sells brand new buffers. When I got this gun, the only thing that was in it was this little teeny tail, which would have done nothing. So very glad that I checked on this. I got a replacement one, and installing it is like, it is not an install process. You put it in and you push it down like that, and that's all you need to do to it. All right, continuing on, we can take this shroud and handguard off by removing these two screws. You have a short one in the front, and then I'm going to push the button and I'm going to slide this kind of backwards and then forward. Right at the end of the gas block, we can pop it down and then slide it out, and then we've just got this sheet metal shroud. All right, now if we look at the front here, you can see this zigzag pattern in the plastic in the front of the handguard. And on the gas block, we have this rotating lever. So if we look down from the receiver end, there are your two gas ports. This is automatic mode. This lever is over on the left, and when I flip it this way, it closes off the gas ports. So that's all it's doing when it converts from pump to semi. It's just automatically opening or closing the gas ports. If the gas ports are open, this is pretty easily spotted by its cleanish gas rings and a lot of carbon fouling. This is essentially your gas piston. It connects to the operating rod right there. So this is always locked onto the operating rod, which is in turn locked onto the bolt right here. That lug sits in that little slot. So this is why in manual mode you're fighting the spring, because in manual mode you're still cycling the whole gas piston. You're just doing it by hand instead of having gas from the barrel push on the thing here. And if we take a closer look at the bolt, you'll see there is a moving element inside it, and this is our locking lug. So like many shotguns, it is a single asymmetric locking lug. When it's in battery, that lifts up, and you can see when it's in battery is when this piece is pulled all the way forward by the op rod. That lifts up, and it locks into that recess right there on this steel barrel extension. That's why this hood is on the barrel, to have a locking lug. This obviously all is made out of steel, and that allows the receiver itself to be just aluminum because it's not actually taking the stress of the locking system. Ooh. All right, there is the SPAS-12, pretty much all disassembled for you. Franchi manufactured the SPAS-12 until the year 2000. They were, of course, making these for law enforcement and military customers around the world, not just the US civilian market. And overall, they made a grand total of between 45 and 50,000 of them, including 18,000 that went to the single biggest user, which may surprise you. It is Egypt. The Egyptian army and police were significant purchasers of the SPAS-12. Now, they discontinue it in 2000 because they are introducing its replacement, which is the SPAS-15. Fundamentally the same system, but with a far improved side folding stock instead of this rather uncomfortable metal top folder, and with a detachable box magazine system instead of the tube. Both really cool improvements. The SPAS-15 is a super cool gun. I have a separate video on it that I will link to in the description text below. There are also a couple other sister guns to the SPAS-12. There's the SAS-12, which is a pump action only counterpart, equivalent sort of. And then there is the Law-12, which is a semi-auto only. So if you didn't want the weight and the complexity of having both systems, Franchi had you covered on either a pump or a semi-auto. Ultimately, Beretta buys up the Franchi company. When they do, the SPAS-12 is pretty well long out of production. And as far as we know, Beretta discarded all of the remaining documentation and tooling, and there is no chance of the SPAS-12 coming back into production now. So they're a fairly scarce gun on the US collector's market. I mean, there are a lot of them here, but they're a very popular gun because of how commonly used they are in games and movies, and people recognize them. And they are, in addition to that, like I said at the beginning, fundamentally really actually very good guns as well, which may not always be the case with guns that are really popular in entertainment venues. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.